A waitress gives warm soup to two homeless twins in the park, unaware they are the daughters of a billionaire. The next day, 3 SUVs pull up to her door. Avery Morrison adjusted her loose bun as she pushed open the back door of Diner 24, the restaurant where she'd worked for almost 7 years. The clock read 11:40 p.m. Her shift had officially ended at 11 p.m., but a group of boisterous teenagers had arrived 10 minutes before closing and made sure to occupy 3 tables. "Good night, dear. Be careful on your way home." Bobby, the 60-something cook, waved from the kitchen window as he put away the last of the pots. "Good night, Bobby. See you tomorrow." A biting wind greeted her as she stepped onto the sidewalk. October was proving to be especially cold this year. Avery pulled her worn coat tighter around her body and adjusted her bag on her shoulder. Her feet ached inside her worn sneakers. 8 hours on her feet serving coffee. Burgers and pies left marks that even the best bath couldn't completely erase. The streets were almost empty at that hour. Some bars still flickered with neon lights, but the center of the small town of Riverdale was slowly falling asleep. Avery loved this time of night, when she could walk uninterrupted, just listening to the sound of her own footsteps. As she passed the Central Park, she noticed something unusual. 2 small silhouettes sat on one of the benches, partially hidden by the shadow of a large oak tree. Avery slowed her pace. At that hour, children shouldn't be alone on the street. She approached cautiously. They were 2 identical girls, twins without a doubt. They couldn't have been more than 6 years old. They wore wrinkled, dirty clothes. Tangled brown hair fell over pale faces. They were huddled together, as if trying to shield each other from the cold. Avery felt a pang in her chest. The twins looked abandoned, with vacant eyes and hollow cheeks. Their shoes were worn, and one of them had a small tear in her shirt sleeve. The cold October wind seemed even crueler as it blew against their fragile bodies. "Hi, hello," Avery said softly, stopping a few steps away so as not to startle them. "Are you okay?" The girls huddled together. One of them stared at Avery with frightened eyes, but said nothing. Avery noticed how dry their lips were and how much they were both trembling. "Are you hungry?" Avery tried again, bending down to their level. No answer, just the same look of fear mixed with distrust. One of their stomachs audibly rumbled, answering for her. Avery looked around. There were no adults nearby who could be with the children, only the department store security guard locking up across the park and a distant couple walking hand in hand. "You know what? I work at that restaurant over there." Avery pointed to the yellow lights of Diner 24. "I'm sure I can get some warm soup. Would you like some?" One of the twins looked in the direction indicated and then at her sister, as if exchanging a silent message. Their eyes held a glimmer of hope that made Avery swallow hard. "Stay here, okay? I'll be back in 5 minutes." Avery smiled, trying to appear as trustworthy as possible. "I promise." Without waiting for a reply, she walked quickly back to the restaurant. Bobby was about to leave when she walked in, breathless. "Did you forget something?" he asked, surprised. "Bobby, there are 2 kids in the park. They look really hungry." The cook frowned. "At this hour?" "Yes, and they're alone. Do we still have any of that vegetable soup?" Bobby didn't need any more explanation. He walked to the stove and relit one of the burners. "I'll warm it up. We have plenty of bread too." In less than 10 minutes, Avery was back in the park carrying a bag with 2 containers of still steaming soup, some bread, and a bottle of water. For a moment, she was afraid the girls had disappeared, but there they were, exactly on the same bench, huddled against the cold. "I brought soup and bread," Avery announced, sitting down at a respectful distance. She took the containers out of the bag and carefully opened them. The aroma of vegetables and herbs spread through the cold air. The twins looked at the soup with wide eyes, but didn't move. One squeezed the other's hand as if communicating without words. "It's warm, but it won't burn," Avery assured, extending 2 plastic spoons. "You can take them." After what seemed like an eternity, one of the twins reached for a spoon and took one of the containers. She brought it to her face, inhaling the scent, and then took a small spoonful. She chewed a piece of carrot slowly. Satisfied, she turned to her sister and nodded. Both began to eat, slowly at first, then with increasing urgency. Avery broke the bread into smaller pieces and handed it to them. They dipped it into the soup carefully, as if every drop was too precious to waste. Slowly, Avery advised gently. There's plenty. You don't need to rush. The girls obeyed, slowing down a bit. When they finished the soup, they picked up the water bottle and drank alternately, without spilling a drop. They didn't say a word, but their eyes, once dull, now seemed a little more alive. The silence of the park was broken only by the wind in the tree leaves and the distant sound of an occasional car. Avery watched the twins, wondering what had happened to them, where their parents were, why they were alone at that hour. But she didn't ask questions. Something told her it wasn't the right time. One of the girls wiped her mouth with the back of her hand and looked at Avery. For a second, a slight smile appeared on her lips, so quick it almost went unnoticed. But Avery saw it, and that small gesture hit her like a warm wave. The other twin gathered the empty containers and placed them carefully back in the bag, as if wanting to leave everything organized. Her movements were precise, almost too adult for her age. "Thank you," she whispered finally, her voice so low Avery almost didn't hear it. It was the only word spoken by either of them during the entire encounter, but it carried the weight of 1,000 unsaid phrases. Avery wanted to do more. She wanted to take them somewhere warm, give them clean clothes, find out their stories, help them find their way home if they even had one. But she also knew that trust was fragile, especially for children who had clearly experienced some kind of trauma. For now, the soup would have to be enough. "You're welcome," Avery replied with a gentle smile. "I'm glad you liked it." She stood up slowly without making any sudden movements. The twins watched her with alert eyes, like small wild animals assessing a potential predator. "I need to go now," Avery said, feeling strangely guilty about leaving them. "Take care, okay?" She took a few steps back, still looking at them, unable to simply turn her back and leave. The twins remained seated, motionless, just watching. Finally, Avery turned and began to walk towards her apartment. Each step felt heavier than the last. She looked back one last time before turning the corner. The twins were still there, two small silhouettes under the dim lamplight, huddled against the night's cold. Avery didn't know their names. She didn't know where they came from or where they were going. She didn't know that this simple gesture, offering warm soup on a cold night, would change not only those children's lives, but her own as well. Forever. Avery woke to the persistent sound of her doorbell. She looked at the clock on her nightstand, 7:23 a.m. Her shift at Diner 24 didn't start until 2 p.m. Who could it be at this hour? She reluctantly got up, pulled her worn bathrobe over her pajamas, and shuffled to the door, wondering if it was a neighbor with a problem or someone selling something. Her disheveled hair fell over her face as she peered through the peephole. A man in a suit stood outside, tall, well-dressed, impeccable posture. It wasn't anyone Avery knew. "Who is it?" she asked without opening the door. "Julian Ward. I need to speak with Miss Avery Morrison." Avery frowned. How did he know her name? And what did a man like that, clearly wealthy, judging by the immaculate suit, want with her? "What do you want?" she insisted, still keeping the door closed. "It's about my daughters." "Please." There was something in his voice, a mix of authority and vulnerability, that made her open the door, if only a crack, protected by the chain. The man looked tired despite his impeccable attire. Deep circles marred his eyes, and his posture, though firm, betrayed exhaustion. "My daughters told me about a woman who gave them soup last night. They described you and mentioned Diner 24. I spoke to your boss this morning and he gave me your address." Avery opened the door wider, now intrigued. "The twins, are they okay?" The man's face briefly lit up. "So, it was you. May I come in? It's important." Avery hesitated, but eventually removed the chain and opened the door completely. It was then that she saw beyond the man, the scene in the street. 3 enormous black SUVs blocked almost the entire narrow road where her small apartment building stood. Men in dark suits and sunglasses, obviously bodyguards, were strategically positioned around the vehicles. Her humble neighborhood had never seen anything like it. She could already imagine Mrs. Peterson, the gossipy neighbor from 2B, glued to her window, cataloging every detail to spread later. I'm Julian Ward, the man said, extending his hand. My daughters, Nora and Hazel, disappeared the day before yesterday. Last night, we finally found them, and they could only talk about one thing, the soup lady. Avery shook the extended hand, still confused. Yes, I found 2 girls in the Central Park. They looked hungry, so... Before she could finish, Julian turned to one of the cars and gestured. The back door of the middle SUV opened, and out jumped the 2 small figures Avery immediately recognized, Nora and Hazel. Dressed in clean, tidy clothes now, colorful coats and shiny shoes, perfectly combed hair, but undeniably the same girls from the park. "It's her, Daddy, it's her!" they cried in unison, running towards Avery. Before she could process what was happening, Avery felt 2 small bodies collide against her legs. The twins hugged her tightly, as if they had found a long-lost treasure. "Soup lady," one of them exclaimed. Was it Nora? While the other buried her face in the side of Avery's thigh. Avery, surprised, instinctively knelt down to their level. They immediately threw their arms around her neck, hugging her with renewed force. The smell of children's shampoo replaced the odor of dirt and cold from the night before. "Hello again," Avery smiled, returning the hug. "Are you doing well?" The girls nodded enthusiastically. "Daddy found us," one said, "and we brought him to see you," the other finished. Julian watched the scene with an expression that was hard to decipher. Relief, curiosity, and something that looked like guilt mixed in his gaze. "Miss Morrison," he said, "would it be possible for us to talk? Inside, perhaps." Avery looked at her tiny, messy apartment. The kitchen table still had the remains of last night's dinner. Clothes waited to be folded on the sofa. "Of course," she replied, a little embarrassed. "But please excuse the mess. I wasn't expecting visitors." Julian nodded to one of the bodyguards, who remained outside while the others returned to the cars. The man and the twins followed Avery inside. The girls didn't let go of her hand for a moment, one on each side, as if afraid she might disappear. "Your soup was the best in the world," one of them said, swinging Avery's hand. "And you didn't yell at us," the other added, looking at her with admiration. Avery felt a pang in her heart. Who would yell at lost and frightened children? Julian cleared his throat, clearly uncomfortable in the small space. He looked around as if he were on an alien planet. The worn furniture, the peeling walls, the plants in repurposed tomato cans. "Girls, can you wait in the car with Mike for a minute? I need to talk to Miss Morrison." "Avery," she corrected automatically. "You can call me Avery." "We don't want to go to the car," one of the twins protested. "Might we want to stay with the soup lady?" the other completed. Julian sighed, a sound heavy with exhaustion. "Just 5 minutes. Then we'll come back, I promise." The girls looked at Avery, as if seeking her approval. She nodded gently. "It's okay. I'm not going anywhere." Reluctantly, the twins released her hands and followed her out of the apartment, casting glances back with every step. When the door closed, Julian collapsed into one of the kitchen chairs, the veneer of a perfectly composed businessman momentarily crumbling. "They were kidnapped," he said directly. "Someone took them from school. We spent 36 hours looking everywhere. Police, private investigators, rewards, nothing worked." Avery sat in the opposite chair, shocked. "My God, I didn't know. I thought they were just lost." "Then we found them at a homeless shelter," Julian continued. "A volunteer recognized them from a poster. They had only been there for a few hours. When we arrived, they wouldn't speak, wouldn't answer questions. They just kept repeating, 'The soup lady, the soup lady.'" He ran a hand through his perfectly cut hair, disarranging it slightly. "Finally, we managed to understand that someone had given them soup at Diner 24. I went there as soon as the restaurant opened this morning. The cook, Bobby, I think, confirmed that you had given soup to 2 children." Avery nodded slowly, processing everything. "They were so hungry and cold. And you helped, without knowing them, without knowing who they were." "Anyone would do the same." Julian gave a short, humorless laugh. "No, they wouldn't. And that's why I'm here." He took an envelope from his inner jacket pocket and placed it on the table, sliding it towards Avery. "I want to thank you properly for what you did for my daughters." Avery looked at the envelope. without touching it. "You don't need to thank me. I didn't do it for money." "I know that, but please accept it. It must have been inconvenient for you and—" "Inconvenient," Avery interrupted, her voice firmer. "It wasn't inconvenient to help two hungry children. It was the least any decent human being would do." Julian looked confused, as if he wasn't used to being contradicted or having his generosity questioned. "I understand you don't need the money, but—" "No, you don't understand," Avery said calmly, pushing the envelope back. "It's not about needing it or not. It's about why I did what I did, and it wasn't for a reward." Julian looked at the rejected envelope, then at Avery. Something in his eyes changed, a flicker of understanding, perhaps. "The girls seem to really like you," he said after a moment. "I just gave them soup." "No, you saw them when no one else did. You listened when no one else listened." A knock on the door interrupted the conversation. One of the bodyguards opened it a crack. "Mr. Ward, the girls are getting impatient, and Mr. Thompson called about the 9 o'clock meeting." Julian consulted his wristwatch, clearly too expensive for Avery to even imagine the price. "I need to go," he said, standing up. "But this isn't over. My daughters, they don't talk like that to anyone. Not since—" He stopped, as if he had said too much. "Anyway, they want to say goodbye." The twins ran in as soon as the door opened, going straight to Avery's side. Their small faces looked more animated than the night before, but there were still shadows in their eyes, the kind of shadows children shouldn't have. "We need to go now," Julian told his daughters. "Say goodbye to Mrs. to Avery." The girls hugged her again with surprising strength for such small bodies. "Goodbye, Soup Lady," one whispered. "Will we see you again?" the other asked, hope trembling in her voice. Avery felt a lump in her throat. "Maybe," she replied, though she knew it was unlikely. People like Julian Ward and his family didn't cross paths with people like her, except in extraordinary circumstances like these. When the door closed behind them, Avery stood in the middle of her small apartment. The envelope with money was still on the table, untouched. Through the window, she saw the 3 black SUVs starting up. In one of the cars, 2 identical little faces looked back, small hands pressed against the tinted glass. Avery waved one last time, feeling strangely empty now that the twins were gone. The envelope on the table seemed to mock her. The Ward mansion sat atop a hill, surrounded by an immaculate garden and protected by an electronic gate. As the 3 SUVs drove through the entrance, Julian looked in the rearview mirror at his daughters. Nora and Hazel sat silently, looking out the window with blank expressions. The enthusiasm they had shown at Avery's house had completely vanished. "We're home, girls," he announced, trying to sound cheerful. "We're home." No response. Just 2 pairs of identical eyes turned outwards, as if searching for something in the familiar landscape. The house was enormous, 3 stories of modern architecture with large windows and clean lines. The staff awaited them at the entrance: the housekeeper, Mrs. Winters, the driver, 2 nannies, and the chef, all with carefully rehearsed smiles and relieved expressions at the sight of the twins. "Welcome back, girls," Mrs. Winters said, bending down to their height as they got out of the car. "We missed you very much." Nora and Hazel didn't reply. They just held each other's hands, as they had since they were found, and walked silently inside. Julian followed them, dismissing the staff with a gesture. He watched his daughters climb the grand staircase, their steps synchronized, their shoulders slumped. "They just need rest," he told himself. "They'll be back to normal soon." 3 days passed, and the twins remained enveloped in a disturbing silence. They spoke only the bare essentials. Yes, no, thank you. And always in low, almost inaudible voices. They ate little, slept poorly. Julian found them in one another's bed every morning, huddled together as if afraid of being separated during the night. On the morning of the 4th day, Julian entered their room carrying 2 large, colorful boxes. The girls were sitting on one of the beds, leafing through a book together, but without the enthusiasm they used to show for stories. "Look what Daddy brought," he announced, placing the boxes on the floor. He opened the first, revealing the most elaborate dollhouse money could buy. 3 stories, detailed furniture, working lights, even a small, functional elevator. "It's from Germany," he explained, as he assembled the structure. "Handmade, one of a kind in the country. The girls watched expressionlessly. When he finished, he proudly pointed to the creation. "What do you think? Isn't it amazing?" Nora looked at Hazel, then at her father. "It's pretty. Thank you, Daddy." Her voice was polite, but emotionless. Neither of them moved to touch the toy. Julian opened the second box, revealing a set of custom-made dolls. "Look, they look just like you. I had them specially made." The dolls, indeed, had brown hair and identical dresses to what the twins usually wore. Julian placed them in the dollhouse, positioning them in the miniature living room. "This can be Nora, and this is Hazel, and this one," he picked up a third doll representing a businessman, "is me, our family." Hazel reached out and took one of the dolls representing the twins. She examined it for a moment, then carefully returned it to the dollhouse. "Thank you," she repeated in the same tone as Nora. Julian sat on the floor, trying to demonstrate how to play with the dollhouse. He moved the pieces, created little stories, made voices. The girls watched politely, but without participating. After 20 minutes, he gave up. "Well, I'll let you play alone now. I have some calls to make. Have fun." When he returned to check on them 2 hours later, the girls were in exactly the same position on the bed, and the dollhouse remained untouched. The next day, Julian brought in Dr. Foster, a renowned child psychologist. "It's normal for them to experience a period of adjustment," the doctor explained after spending an hour with the twins. They suffered significant trauma. They need time and space to process." "But they weren't like this before," Julian insisted. "They were lively, talkative. Now they seem empty." Dr. Foster adjusted his glasses. "Mr. Ward, if I may be frank, when was the last time you spent an entire day with your daughters before the incident?" Julian hesitated. "I have a company to run, but I always made sure they had everything they needed. The best schools, the best nannies." "What about you? How much of yourself did they have?" The question hung in the air like an accusation. Julian didn't answer. "I suggest regular therapy," the doctor continued more softly. "And I also suggest that you participate. Reconnecting with your daughters will be essential for their recovery." Julian agreed, but after the doctor left, he stood looking at the closed door of the girls' room, feeling completely helpless. That night, Julian heard a scream. He ran to the twins' room and found Nora sitting on the bed, gasping, eyes wide with terror. Hazel was hugging her, whispering something in her ear. "What happened?" he asked, sitting on the edge of the bed. "Nightmare," Hazel replied for her sister. "She dreamed we were lost again." Julian reached out to touch Nora's face, but she instinctively flinched. The gesture, small but unmistakable, felt like a stab to his chest. Can I get you a glass of water? Or warm milk?" Nora shook her head negatively, still not looking at him. "We're okay, Daddy," Hazel said. "We just need to sleep." Julian remained seated for a moment, awkward, not knowing what to do with his hands, with his words, with the weight of the silence that seemed to suffocate him. "Right, good night then. Daddy's in the next room if you need anything." As he left, he heard Hazel whisper to her sister, "It's okay. We're together." There was no place for him in that comfort. In the morning, Julian cancelled all his meetings. He spent the day trying to connect with his daughters. He made pancakes for breakfast, burnt on the edges but edible, took them for a walk in the garden, tried to play their favorite games. The twins politely participated in everything, but without real enthusiasm. They answered when asked, followed when led, but the distance remained, an invisible chasm that Julian didn't know how to cross. At dinner, after another day of failed attempts, he watched his daughters eat in silence. He remembered how they had lit up in Avery Morrison's presence, how they had run to her, hugged her, talked with excitement. The waitress had achieved in minutes what he couldn't in days. He made a decision. Avery was cleaning tables when she saw the man enter Diner 24. Even without his suit, it was impossible not to recognize Julian Ward. He looked different, hair less tidy, deeper circles under his eyes, less imposing posture. He walked directly to her, ignoring the curious glances of the other customers. "I need your help," he said without preamble. Avery dropped her cleaning cloth. What happened? Are the girls okay? Physically, yes. Julian ran a hand through his hair. But they won't talk, they barely eat. They have nightmares. I've tried everything. Toys, doctors, attention. Nothing works. Avery led him to a table in the corner, away from curious ears. It's only been a few days, she said gently. They've been through something traumatic. They need time. It's not just that. Julian lowered his voice. They don't trust me. They won't let me get close. Not really. There was a vulnerability in his voice that hadn't existed in the confident man who had appeared at her door days before. What can I do? Avery asked. They only talk about you. Or the soup lady, the soup lady. When I mentioned your name this morning, it was the first time I'd seen them react with anything but empty politeness. He looked directly into her eyes. I know it's a lot to ask, but could you visit the girls just once? Avery hesitated. Entering Julian Ward's world, the mansion on the hill that everyone in town knew but few had seen inside, felt like crossing an invisible boundary. I don't know if that would be appropriate. Please, Julian interrupted. I'll pay for your time, of course. It's not a matter of money. Then what is it the girls need? I need... He stopped, as if struggling to find the right words. Finally, he looked at Avery with raw honesty. I need help. I don't know how to reach them. Avery looked at the man in front of her. No longer the powerful businessman, but just a desperate father. She thought of the twins, their frightened eyes in the park, how they had clung to her. All right, she said finally. When? The relief on Julian's face was immediate. Today, after your shift. I finish at 8. I'll send a car to pick you up. Exactly at 8. A black SUV awaited Avery at the back door of Diner 24. The driver, a serious man in a dark suit, opened the door for her with a formal politeness that made her feel out of place in her simple jeans and old sweater. 20 minutes later, they were passing through the gates of the Ward mansion. Avery looked out the window, impressed by the size of the property. Julian was waiting for her at the door. He looked even more tired than earlier, but there was a spark of hope in his eyes. The girls don't know you're coming, he explained as he led her inside. I thought it would be a nice surprise. The house was exactly as Avery had imagined. Large, elegant and impersonal. Artwork that probably cost more than she earned in a year decorated pristine white walls. The marble floor gleamed under her worn sneakers. Julian led her to a room on the second floor. Through the half-open door, Avery saw the twins sitting on a rug, listlessly leafing through a book. Nora, Hazel, Julian called softly. I have a surprise for you. The girls looked up without interest, and until they saw Avery, the effect was instantaneous and dramatic. Their faces transformed, eyes wide, mouths open in surprise that quickly turned into smiles. Soup lady, they cried in unison, jumping to their feet. They ran to Avery, hugging her legs tightly. For the first time since returning home, there was real life in their movements, genuine joy in their voices. Julian watched the scene with a mixture of relief and sadness. His daughters, who had barely spoken to him for days, were now overflowing with emotion for a stranger who had given them soup just once. You came to visit us, Hazel exclaimed, pulling Avery by the hand. Come see our books. We have a huge room, Nora added, holding Avery's other hand. And a dollhouse from Germany, both spoke at once, words pouring out in torrents, as if they had saved them all just for this moment. They guided Avery through the room, showing her toys, books, clothes, all with an enthusiasm Julian hadn't seen since before the kidnapping. Avery responded with genuine interest, kneeling to their height, listening attentively to every hurried explanation, every interrupted story. She didn't feign interest or simplify her answers. She treated the twins as complete people, worthy of real attention. Julian remained in the doorway, observing. Something ached in his chest, seeing the ease with which Avery connected with his daughters, something he couldn't do despite all his effort, all his money, all his desperate love. After an hour, Avery announced she needed to leave. But you just got here, Nora protested. Don't go, Hazel begged, clinging to Avery's arm. I have to work early tomorrow, Avery explained gently, but I can come back another day if your dad allows. Both turned to Julian with pleading eyes. "Please, Daddy. Can she come back tomorrow?" It was the first time in days they had addressed him directly, with real emotion in their voices. "Of course," Julian replied without hesitation. "If Avery can, of course." The twins hugged Avery one last time before she left. Then, surprisingly, they ran to Julian and hugged him too, the first spontaneous physical contact they had initiated since their return. "Thank you, Daddy," Nora said, and there was genuine warmth in her voice. Julian felt something break inside him, a barrier he didn't even know existed. In the car, returning to her apartment, Avery reflected on what she had witnessed. The girls were no different from any child. They needed attention, security, presence. Julian clearly loved them, but he seemed not to know how to show it in ways they could understand and accept. 3 days later, Avery had already visited the mansion twice more. With each visit, the twins seemed more animated, more present. They began to talk about school, about friends, about small details of their lives before the kidnapping, and with each visit, Julian observed, learned, tried. He began to join them during the activities they did with Avery, coloring, reading stories, just talking. At first, the girls tolerated him. Then, gradually, they began to include him. On the third visit, as Avery was about to leave, Julian accompanied her to the door. "What do you do?" he asked abruptly. "With them, I mean, how do you get them to open up like that?" Avery thought for a moment. "Nothing special, I'm just present." "Really present?" "I don't understand." "You care about them. You take care of them. You give them everything they need materially. That's important." Avery chose her words carefully. "But they also need you. Not what you can buy or provide. They need you yourself." Julian stared at her, processing the words. "I can keep coming," Avery offered. "But I think, in time, you'll find you already have everything you need to reconnect with your daughters." In the car, on the way home, Avery looked out the window at the city lights. She thought of the twins, their newly rediscovered smiles, how they clung to her as if she were a lifeline. She also thought of Julian, his tired, desperate eyes, how he observed her every interaction with his daughters, as if trying to decipher a complex code. It wasn't just soup she had offered that cold night in the park. It was something more fundamental, rarer than she had realized at the time. Authentic presence, genuine attention. For children hungry for connection, that had been more nourishing than any food. Avery became a constant presence at the Ward mansion over the weeks. The visits, which began as exceptional, now followed a routine. 3 times a week, after her shift at Diner 24, she would spend a few hours with the twins. The transformation in the girls was visible. They smiled again, talked, played as children their age should. That Saturday afternoon, Julian had an emergency meeting, despite his recent efforts to reduce his weekend workload. Before leaving, he found Avery in the kitchen, helping the girls bake chocolate chip cookies. "Sorry about this," he said, adjusting his tie. "It shouldn't take more than 2 hours." "Don't worry," Avery replied, wiping flour from her hands. "We're having fun, aren't we, girls?" Nora and Hazel, with chocolate-smeared faces, nodded enthusiastically. Julian hesitated at the door, visibly torn between duty and the desire to stay. "We're going to have a picnic in the garden when the cookies are ready," Hazel announced, stirring the dough with vigor. "And build a blanket fort," Nora added. Julian smiled, a smile that still carried a shadow of sadness. "Save some cookies for me." After he left, the girls worked with concentration, shaping the dough into irregular forms. Avery watched attentively, intervening only when necessary. She had learned that part of the magic was in allowing them to do things themselves, even if it meant crooked cookies and a kitchen to clean afterward. "I don't think Daddy ever made cookies before you came," Nora commented as they put the first batch in the oven. "He was probably busy," Avery replied carefully. She always avoided making any comments that could be interpreted as criticism of Julian. "He's always busy," Hazel said, licking chocolate from the spoon. "But he's less busy now." "That's true. He's trying to spend more time with you." The girls exchanged glances. That silent communication Avery had learned to recognize as characteristic of them. "Why do you think he's different now?" Nora finally asked. Avery thought for a moment, choosing her words carefully. I think he realized how important you are. Sometimes, people only understand the value of something when they're afraid of losing it. Another glance exchanged between the twins. Do you think he was scared when we disappeared? Hazel asked in a low voice. I'm sure he was. He was desperate looking for you. The girls fell silent, processing the information. Avery didn't push. She had learned that with Nora and Hazel, the most important moments arose when least expected, in seemingly mundane conversations. Later, as promised, they had a picnic in the garden. The day was surprisingly pleasant for late autumn, with a pale sun filtering through sparse clouds. They spread a large checkered blanket on the grass under the partial shade of an old oak and laid out the cookies, sandwiches and juice they had prepared. The twins seemed especially relaxed outdoors, away from the opulent but somehow suffocating walls of the mansion. They ran, laughed, chased occasional butterflies. Avery watched them with a smile, sitting on the blanket, enjoying these moments of normalcy. After some time, the girls got tired and came back to sit next to her. Hazel lay down, resting her head in Avery's lap, while Nora hugged her knees, looking at the horizon. You can see the school from here, Nora said, pointing to a low red building partially visible beyond the fence that bordered the property. Is that it? It looks nice, Avery commented. It used to be nice, Hazel murmured. Before? Avery felt a shift in the atmosphere, something heavy and unsaid hanging between them. She said nothing, just continued to stroke Hazel's hair, waiting. Do you know how we disappeared? Nora finally asked, still looking at the distant school. Not exactly, Avery replied honestly. Your dad mentioned you were taken, but he didn't talk about details. The twins exchanged another of their meaningful glances. Their woman picked us up, Hazel said suddenly, her voice small against Avery's pant leg. From school. Avery felt her heart quicken, but kept her voice calm. A woman. She said Daddy had sent her, Nora continued, hugging her knees tighter, that it was an emergency and he couldn't come. And you went with her, Hazel nodded, still lying in Avery's lap. She knew our names, and she had a badge from Daddy's company. We got into her car, Nora added. It was black, like Daddy's cars. Avery took a deep breath, trying to process what she was hearing without showing the alarm she felt. What happened next? She drove for a long time, Hazel replied. She said we were going to meet Daddy at a special place. But then she stopped at a mall, Nora continued. She told us to wait while she bought a surprise gift. And she never came back, Hazel finished, her voice breaking on the last word. Avery felt a lump in her throat. How long did you wait? A long time, Nora said, until the mall closed. A security guard found us and asked where our mum was. We said she was coming back, Hazel added, tears starting to form in her eyes, but he said we had to leave. We were scared, Nora confessed, her own voice choked now. We thought Daddy had sent that woman to take us away because he didn't want us anymore. The last sentence came out as a sob, and something seemed to break inside both of them at the same time. Years of security shattered in an instant by an incomprehensible betrayal. Tears that had been held back for weeks now flowed freely. Avery pulled both girls closer, hugging them as they cried. She didn't offer false comforts or try to minimize their pain. She was just there, present, solid, absorbing the storm of emotions. We were so scared, Hazel sobbed against Avery's shoulder. It was dark and cold, Nora added, and we didn't know where to go. We tried to call Daddy, but we couldn't remember his number, Hazel continued. And we didn't have money for the bus. We walked a lot, Nora said, until we couldn't anymore. We were so hungry, Hazel whispered, and we thought no one would ever find us. But you found us, Nora said, looking at Avery with red, swollen eyes. You gave us soup, and you didn't ask for anything in return, Hazel added. Avery felt her own tears threatening to fall, but she held them back. The girls needed her strength now, not her emotions. Do you remember what this woman looked like? She asked gently, when the sobs began to subside. The twins were silent for a moment, thinking. She was pretty, Nora said finally. Blonde hair like the news anchor Daddy watches. She wore fancy clothes, Hazel added, and she spoke in a formal way, like teachers do when visitors come to school. Did she say her name? Both shook their heads negatively. She just said she worked with Daddy, Nora replied, and that he trusted her a lot. Do you think you would recognize her if you saw her again? Avery asked carefully. The twins exchanged glances again, then nodded in unison. We never told Daddy this, Hazel confessed in a low voice. We were afraid he'd get mad, or sad, Nora added. Your daddy would never be mad at you for this, Avery assured. Never. He loves you more than anything. Are you going to tell him? Hazel asked, apprehensive. Avery hesitated. She didn't want to betray the girls' trust, but this information was crucial. Someone had deliberately kidnapped Julian's daughters, using his name to gain the children's trust. I think your daddy needs to know, she said finally. And to make sure this never happens again, and to find this woman. The twins looked at each other, thoughtful. Okay, Nora agreed after a moment. But can you tell him? We don't want to see him sad. I can tell him, Avery promised. But know that sometimes adults need to be sad to be able to fix things. Julian returned shortly after 5, looking tired but less tense than before. He found Avery and the girls in the living room, watching an animated movie. The twins ran to hug him as soon as he entered, a recently rediscovered habit that still surprised him every time. How was the meeting, Daddy? Nora asked. Boring, he replied with a smile. Much more boring than cookies and picnics. We saved some for you, Hazel said, pointing to a plate on the coffee table. Julian tasted one, making an exaggerated expression of delight that made the girls laugh. The best cookies I've ever eaten. The twins turned their attention back to the movie, and Julian took the opportunity to approach Avery. How was the afternoon? Good, mostly, she replied softly. But we need to talk. In private. Julian immediately caught the seriousness in her voice and nodded. Of course. After the movie ends, that would be best. The next hour seemed to drag. Avery tried to focus on the movie, but her mind kept returning to the conversation in the garden, the girls' tears, the terror they must have felt. Who was this woman? Why kidnap Julian's daughters only to abandon them? When the credits finally started to roll, Mrs. Winters appeared to take the girls for their bath before dinner. Julian led Avery to his office, an imposing room with dark wood paneling and a panoramic view of the gardens. What happened? He asked as soon as he closed the door. Avery took a deep breath. The girls told me how they were kidnapped. Julian sat abruptly on the edge of his desk. They talked about it. With you? Avery nodded. During the picnic, it started as a casual conversation about school. She recounted everything the twins had told her, the woman who introduced herself as being sent by Julian, the company badge, the car ride, the abandonment at the mall. As she spoke, she watched Julian's face transform. First disbelief, then horror, and finally a rage so intense it seemed to emanate from him in palpable waves. They thought I had sent someone to take them away, he said when Avery finished, his voice almost unrecognizable. My God, they thought I didn't want them anymore. They were confused and scared, Avery said softly. They're children. Julian stood up and walked to the window, his back to her. His shoulders were tense, fists clenched at his sides. Who would do that? He murmured, more to himself than to Avery. Who would use my name to hurt my daughters? Someone who has access to your company, Avery observed. Yeah, the girls said she had a badge. Julian turned at his face a mask of determination. I'll find out who it was, and when I do... He didn't complete the sentence, but he didn't need to. The threat was implicit in every line of his body. The girls said they'd be able to recognize her, Avery added. If they saw her again... Julian nodded slowly, processing the information. That means it's someone they might have seen before, maybe at the office, at some company event. He walked back to his desk and picked up the phone. I need to increase security immediately. Cameras, additional guards, and I'll need the school's footage, the employee list. He stopped mid-sentence, looking at Avery as if he had just realized something. Sorry, This is a lot to process. I understand, Avery said. Just be careful with the girls. They've been through enough trauma. If they see armed guards everywhere, they might get even more scared. Julian slowly lowered the phone. You're right. I need to think this through carefully. He ran a hand over his face, looking suddenly exhausted. I still can't believe someone would do something like that. The important thing now is that they're safe, Avery emphasized, and that they're starting to recover. Julian looked at her with an intensity that made her look away. Thanks to you. They never would have told me this. That's not true. They just needed time and space to process what happened. No, it's more than that. Julian stepped closer, stopping a few feet from her. You have something I don't. Something that makes them trust you, open up to you. I have time, Avery replied simply. And I don't carry the burden of being their father, of needing to be strong all the time, of having all the answers. Julian absorbed her words in silence. After a moment, he nodded slightly. I need to change, he said finally. I've been absent, even when I'm physically present. You love your daughters, Avery observed. That's the most important thing. It's not enough, Julian replied, a new determination in his voice. Love isn't just a feeling, it's action, it's presence, and I've been failing at that. He walked to his desk and opened his laptop. After a few clicks, he turned the screen so Avery could see my schedule for the next few weeks. Meetings, conferences, business trips. The screen showed a completely filled calendar without a single blank space. This is how I've been living for the past few years. As Avery watched, Julian began clicking on appointments, one after another, cancelling or delegating them. From now on, nothing is more important than my daughters. Nothing. Avery watched the transformation happening before her eyes, not just on the digital calendar, but in the man in front of her. Something fundamental was changing in Julian Ward, like tectonic plates shifting, reorganizing the basic structure of who he was. I'll find out who did this, he promised, eyes fixed on the screen as he continued clearing his schedule. But more importantly, I'm going to be the father Nora and Hazel deserve, the father I should have been all along. Avery thought of the twins, their faces as they recounted the abandonment, the hunger, the fear. She thought of the unknown woman who had caused so much suffering for reasons still incomprehensible. And she thought of Julian, determined to change, to rebuild himself for his daughters. The pain Nora and Hazel had experienced, the pain of abandonment, of betrayal of trust, was a pain that had no adequate name. But perhaps, with time and true love, that pain could transform into something different, a scar that, while never completely disappearing, would eventually become just a mark of the past, no longer an open wound. The alarm rang at 6 in the morning, but Julian was already awake. Sitting on the edge of the bed, he looked at the calendar on his phone, now remarkably emptier than in previous weeks. Morning meetings had been moved to the afternoon, business trips, cancelled or delegated, conference calls, rescheduled for times that didn't conflict with his daughters. Time. Today would be the first day he personally would pick up Nora and Hazel from school. Something so simple, so basic, something he had never done before. At 3:30 in the afternoon, Julian's black Audi pulled up in front of the school. Unlike the SUVs with chauffeurs and security guards that usually picked up the twins, today it was just him. He felt strangely nervous, as if he was about to meet people he didn't know well. The bell rang and children began to stream out of the gates. Julian got out of the car and stood on the sidewalk, watching the flow of students. He saw a few mothers waving, recognizing him with surprise. He spotted the twins, hand in hand as always, carrying colorful backpacks. "Tired, Daddy?" Hazel's voice carried so much surprise that Julian felt a pang of remorse. The two approached, hesitant. "Hi, girls." Julian smiled, crouching down to their height. "I thought I'd pick you up today. Is that okay?" The twins exchanged confused glances. "Where's Mike?" Nora asked, referring to the usual driver. "I gave him the day off." Julian extended his hands. "How about we go get some ice cream before heading home?" The girls' eyes widened, first in surprise, then in cautious joy. "Can we really?" Hazel asked, as if fearing it was some kind of mistake. "Of course. I know a great place a few blocks from here." On the way to the ice cream parlor, Julian asked about their day. "How was art class today? You mentioned there would be a special project." The twins seemed surprised that he remembered. We made mosaics with colored paper, Nora explained. Mine was a dragon, Hazel added. The teacher said it looked pretty. I bet it did. You've always been talented with art. How do you know? Hazel asked innocently. The question hit Julian like a punch. How did he know? He had seen their drawings, of course, hung by staff on the refrigerator, but he had never really observed the process, never sat down to create something with them. Because, he hesitated, because I can see it in the drawings you make at home. That simple question ignited something in Julian, the determination to truly know his daughters, not just assume he knew them. The following week, Julian reorganized his entire routine. He started taking the girls to school every morning and picking them up every afternoon. The first week was strange. Broken conversations, awkward silences, the tension of a father and daughters who were, essentially, getting to know each other for the first time. On a rainy Wednesday, when school ended early, Julian decided to take the twins to lunch at a restaurant near the school. What do you usually order when you come here? He asked. We've never been here, Nora replied, examining the menu with curiosity. Really? I thought the school brought you on outings. The school takes us to the museum and the park, Hazel explained. Mrs. Winters sometimes takes us to the cafe near home. Julian realized with discomfort how many common experiences his daughters had never had. Well, then this is an adventure for all of us, he smiled. Let's try something new. The girls chose hamburgers. We've never had a hamburger outside of home, Nora exclaimed in amazement, and Julian ordered the same, getting into the spirit of the moment. During lunch, he asked specific questions. Who were their friends? What was their favorite subject? What did they play during recess? With each answer, Julian realized how much he didn't know about his daughters' daily lives. Emma is my best friend, Nora explained. She has a dog named Peanut. And I like to play with Lily, Hazel said. We both want to be astronauts. Astronauts? Julian asked, genuinely surprised. I didn't know you were interested in space. There's a book about planets in the school library, she explained, brightening up. The moon has marks that look like a face, and Saturn has rings that are made of ice and dust. Julian listened, fascinated, as Hazel talked about the solar system with an enthusiasm he had never witnessed before. Can we visit the planetarium someday? Hazel asked suddenly, her eyes shining with hope. Of course. How about this Saturday? The smile he received in return was worth more than any business deal he had ever closed. The planetarium was just the beginning. In the following weeks, Julian discovered that Nora loved mystery stories and spent hours in the school library looking for clues in picture books. He discovered that Hazel was afraid of thunderstorms but loved the rain, that they both hated peas but loved broccoli, as long as it was served with cheese sauce. Small details, fragments of the puzzle that formed his daughters' personalities. A month after starting his new routine, Julian was sitting at the kitchen table with the twins, helping them with their homework. Daddy, how do you spell elephant? Nora asked, pencil in hand. Why don't we try to figure it out together? Julian suggested. Let's break it down into syllables. While helping Nora with her spelling, he watched Hazel drawing something with great concentration. What are you doing, Hazel? She held up the drawing, a figure that appeared to be Julian, holding hands with two small girls. It's us, she explained. Me, you, and Nora. Going to get ice cream after school. Julian felt his throat tighten. Something so simple, picking them up from school, getting ice cream, had become important enough to be immortalized in a drawing. It's beautiful, he said, his voice a little hoarse. Can we put it on the fridge? Hazel nodded enthusiastically, and Julian got up to fix the drawing to the refrigerator door with a magnet. Beside it, there were already other drawings, all recent, all depicting moments they had shared in the last month. That night, at bedtime, the girls asked Julian to read them a story. Before, this would have been delegated to Mrs. Winters or one of the nannies. Now it was a ritual he eagerly anticipated. He sat between the two beds, with the book Nora had chosen, a story about a bear who lost its family and then found them again. Midway through the story, he realized Hazel had already fallen asleep. Nora fought against sleep, blinking heavily. Do you want me to continue tomorrow? He whispered. No, she murmured sleepily. I want to hear the end. I want to know if the little bear is okay." Julian smiled and continued reading, his voice soft in the room, lit only by the bedside lamp. When he reached the last page, where the little bear finally reunited with his family, he looked at Nora. She was sleeping, a small smile on her lips. Carefully, Julian closed the book and leaned down to kiss his daughter's forehead. He did the same with Hazel, adjusting the blanket around her. "Good night, princesses," he whispered. As he was about to close the door, he heard a sleepy voice. "Good night, Daddy. We love you." The simple words carried a weight of belonging, of connection, that made Julian's eyes burn with unshed tears. One Saturday, he woke to the sound of laughter coming from the kitchen. He found the twins trying to make pancakes, under Mrs. Winter's patient supervision. Flour covered the counter, the floor, and much of their faces. "Daddy!" Nora exclaimed upon seeing him. "We're making breakfast for you." "A surprise," Hazel added, holding a spatula like a magic wand. Julian felt warmth spreading through his chest. Before, he would have worried about the mess. Now, he saw only the love behind the gesture. "It's the best surprise I've ever received," he said sincerely, joining them at the counter. "Can I help?" The pancakes came out crooked and a little burnt, but for Julian it was the best breakfast he had ever had. The following Sunday, he surprised his daughters with tickets to the zoo. The entire day was dedicated to seeing animals, eating cotton candy, and taking pictures. When Nora got tired of walking so much, Julian carried her on his shoulders without hesitation, something he never would have done before, worried about his image, about his immaculate suit. Now, in jeans and sneakers, ice cream stains on his shirt, and a daughter in each hand, he felt lighter than he had ever felt wearing designer clothes. On Monday morning, upon entering the kitchen for breakfast, he was greeted with spontaneous hugs. "Good morning, Daddy," both exclaimed in unison, clinging to his legs. Julian lifted them, one in each arm, and hugged them back. "Good morning, my girls." They were no longer just the twins, Julian Ward's daughters. They were Nora and Hazel, with their distinct personalities, their fears and dreams, their unique laughs. And he was no longer just the distant provider. He was the father who read stories, who helped with homework, who knew their favorite foods and made them laugh. The bond, fragile and tense at first, grew stronger day by day, story by story. It wasn't perfect, but it was real, genuine, alive. And that, Julian now realized, was worth more than the entire empire he had built. Thursday morning began like any other in the Ward family's new rhythm of life. Julian prepared breakfast while the twins packed their school bags. It was a domestic ballet that, after weeks of practice, flowed with surprising naturalness. "Nora, don't forget your science book," Julian reminded her, placing pancakes on plates. "Already packed," she replied, proud of her newfound organization. Julian smiled, admiring how things had changed. The initial chaos had given way to a routine that, while still having its moments of confusion, worked. The girls were happier, more open, and he, for the first time in years, felt truly connected to something beyond work. His cell phone vibrated in his pocket. He ignored it. Lately, he had established strict rules about when he took work-related calls. Breakfast with his daughters was sacred. After dropping the twins off at school, with promises of picking them up later for a trip to the park, Julian finally checked his phone. 5 missed calls from Amanda, his executive assistant, 3 messages marked as urgent. He called her immediately. "Amanda, I'm sorry I didn't answer earlier." "What happened?" Amanda's voice sounded tense on the other end of the line. "Mr. Ward, we have a situation with the Asian merger. The Korean investors are threatening to withdraw their support. You need to come to the office immediately." Julian felt the familiar tug of responsibility. The merger with the Asian conglomerate was the biggest deal of the year, the result of months of delicate negotiations. "I'll be there in 30 minutes. On the way to the office, Julian made another call, this time to Avery. "Avery, sorry to bother you. An emergency came up at the office and I won't be able to pick up the girls from school today." "Could you?" "Of course," she replied promptly. "My shift ends at 3. I can pick them up and stay with them until you get back." Julian visibly relaxed, leaning back in his seat. An essential part of their lives. In just a few months, Avery had gone from stranger to an essential part of their lives. Thank you. I don't know how long I'll be, but I'll try to get back as soon as possible. Don't worry. We'll have a snack and maybe watch a movie. They'll understand. Julian hung up, feeling less guilty about breaking his promise to his daughters. He knew that with Avery they would be fine. At the office, the situation was even worse than Amanda had described. The investors were not only threatening to withdraw support, but had already issued a preliminary statement announcing their withdrawal. What should have been a quick meeting turned into a marathon of video conferences, international calls, and contract revisions. At 6 in the evening, when the crisis finally seemed under control, Julian realized he had forgotten to check his personal phone. He had 3 missed calls from Avery. A chill ran down his spine. He called immediately. "Avery, are the girls okay?" "Everything's great," she reassured him. "I just wanted to know if you'll be much longer. We made cookies and the girls are eager for you to try them." Julian visibly relaxed, leaning back in his chair. "I still have a few things to sort out here, maybe another hour. Tell them I'm bringing pizza for dinner as compensation for the postponed outing. They'll love it. Don't worry, everything's under control here." Julian hung up, grateful again for Avery's presence in their lives. He returned to the documents scattered across his desk, determined to resolve everything as quickly as possible. He was so focused that he didn't notice Amanda standing at his office door until she gently cleared her throat. "Mr. Ward, it's almost 8. Mr. Nakamura has accepted our revised terms. The crisis seems resolved, at least for now." Julian rubbed his tired eyes. "Thank you, Amanda. You did an excellent job today." She smiled, adjusting her impeccable grey suit. "Thank you. There's just one more thing. The agreement documents need to be signed today to be sent to Seoul in the morning." Julian sighed. "I'll sign them now, then." Amanda hesitated. "Actually, they're still being finalized by the legal department. They should be ready in about an hour. I can bring them to your house later, if you prefer to go home now." Julian considered the offer. He was exhausted, and the idea of returning home to his daughters was tempting. "That would be great, Amanda. Thank you." "No problem. I know how important it is for you to spend time with your daughters now." Julian noticed something strange in Amanda's tone, a kind of subtle emphasis on the word now, but he was too tired to analyze it. He grabbed his jacket and left, eager to get home. The Ward mansion was lit and welcoming when Julian arrived, carrying 2 large pizza boxes. He heard laughter coming from the kitchen, the sound of his happy daughters, a sound that still surprised him whenever he heard it. "I'm home," he announced, entering the kitchen. "And I brought dinner." Nora and Hazel ran to hug him, still wearing chocolate-stained aprons. "Daddy!" "We made cookies with Avery, and she taught us how to make star-shaped cookies." Julian hugged his daughters, feeling the stress of the day dissipate. Avery watched the scene with a smile, wiping flour from her hands. "Sorry about the mess," she said. "We got a little carried away." "Mess is part of the fun," Julian replied, a phrase he never would have said a few months ago. Dinner was lively, with the girls recounting their school day and the cookies they had made. Julian told a simplified version of his work emergency, leaving out the stressful parts. They were finishing eating when the doorbell rang. "That must be Amanda with the documents," Julian explained, getting up. "I'll be back in a minute." He opened the door to find his secretary holding an elegant folder. Amanda Sherman had worked with him for 5 years. She was efficient, discreet, and totally reliable, the backbone of his daily operations. "Come in," Julian invited. "I can sign the documents in the living room." Amanda entered, her high heels echoing on the marble floor of the hall. She wore the same grey suit as earlier, blonde hair pulled back in a perfect bun, impeccable makeup despite the long day. "I don't want to bother you," she said. "I know you're with your daughters." "It's no bother. We're just finishing dinner." Julian led her towards the living room, but before they got there, the kitchen door opened. Nora came out, holding a cookie. "Daddy, you have to try." The girl froze mid-sentence. The cookie fell from her hand, shattering on the floor. Her eyes widened in terror. "Nora, what's wrong?" Julian asked, concerned by the sudden change. Hazel appeared behind her sister. Curious about the interruption, when she saw Amanda, she had the same shocked reaction as Nora. Her face paled. "It's her," Nora whispered, pointing at Amanda, her voice trembling. "The woman who took us." Julian felt as if the air had been sucked from his lungs. "What? It was her," Hazel cried, tears forming in her eyes. "She picked us up from school." The girls recoiled, clutching each other. Avery appeared at the kitchen door, confused, until she realized what was happening. Immediately, she stood by the twins, protective. Julian slowly turned to Amanda, who remained motionless, her face an indecipherable mask. "Amanda!" His voice was almost unrecognizable, a mixture of shock and nascent fury. She didn't reply, just stood there, like a statue. "My daughters are saying you kidnapped them. Is this true?" A heavy silence filled the hall. The girls sobbed silently, clinging to Avery. Julian felt his heart pounding in his chest, so loudly he was sure everyone could hear it. Finally, Amanda spoke, her voice surprisingly calm. "They're confused. I would never do something like that." "Hazel, Nora," Julian called, without taking his eyes off Amanda. "Are you sure? Look closely." "It's her," Nora insisted, trembling. "She said you sent her to pick us up. She had a badge just like yours." "She took us in the black car," Hazel added. "And then she left us at the mall." Julian's face contorted into an expression of fury Avery had never seen. "Avery, take the girls upstairs, please." "Julian, I don't think—" "Please," he repeated, his tone brooking no argument. Avery hesitated but nodded. She guided the twins away, hurrying up the stairs. Julian waited until he heard a door close upstairs before turning back to Amanda. "Explain yourself," he demanded, his voice dangerously low. Amanda placed the folder on a side table with deliberately slow movements. When she turned to Julian again, there was something different in her eyes, an intense, almost feverish glint. "You never really saw them," she said. "You had these wonderful daughters and you barely spent any time with them. What are you talking about?" 5 years, Julian. I've worked with you for 5 years. I know every aspect of your life. I know how you like your coffee. I know which shirts you prefer. I know when you're stressed just by the way you breathe." Julian took a step back, disturbed by the intimate tone. "Amanda, answer my question. Did you kidnap my daughters?" She smiled, a strange, sad smile. "It wasn't a kidnapping. It was an awakening for you." Julian felt his blood run cold. "My God, it was you." "I've loved you for years," Amanda continued, as if she hadn't heard him. "Years of watching you drown in work, neglecting what truly matters. Those girls were just an accessory to you, something that existed on the periphery of your life." She took a step towards him. Julian remained motionless, too shocked to react. "I thought that if they disappeared for a while, you would finally realize 2 things. How important they are and how important I am. How I've always been there, taking care of everything, anticipating your needs, being the person you truly count on. Julian struggled to find words. "You abandoned my 6-year-old daughters alone." "It wasn't like that," Amanda protested, her control beginning to falter. "I left them in a safe place, full of people. I knew someone would find them soon. They just needed to be away for a few days. They were on the streets," Julian exploded. "They were hungry, cold. They could have died. I never meant to hurt them," Amanda screamed back, tears beginning to stream down her perfect face, smudging her makeup. "I just wanted you to see, Julian, to see what was right in front of you all this time." Julian recoiled, disgusted. "See what?" "A woman obsessed to the point of putting 2 children in danger." "To see that I'm the right person for you," she sobbed. "I know everything about you. I know you better than anyone. I thought that if the girls disappeared, you'd realize how much you need me. How you always have." Julian stared at her, truly seeing her for the first time. Not the efficient, discreet secretary, but a woman consumed by a sick obsession she confused with love. "You're sick, Amanda," he said finally, his voice more controlled now. "And you're fired. Get out of my house now, before I call the police." Her face transformed, moving from desperation to rage. "The police? You can't do that." I just wanted to help you see what really matters." "What matters?" Julian repeated, incredulous. "You traumatized my daughters. They thought I had abandoned them." "And didn't that open your eyes?" Amanda argued, frantic. "Look at you now. You finally act like a real father. You finally give them attention. I did that. I gave you this chance." Julian stared at her, a terrible understanding forming in his mind. "You really believe that, don't you? That you were doing me a favor?" "I was," she insisted. "And it worked. You changed. You're different. Better. Because of what I did." Julian took a deep breath, trying to control the rage that threatened to consume him. "I'm going to say this one last time. Get out of my house. Tomorrow. Your access to the company will be revoked. Do not approach me or my daughters again. Ever." Amanda stood still, her face devastated by rejection. For a moment, Julian thought she would argue. Instead, she picked up the folder she had brought. "You still need to sign these documents," she said mechanically, as if they were having a normal meeting. "Leave the folder," Julian ordered. "Someone will pick it up tomorrow." Amanda put the folder back on the table, her movement almost robotic. Then, without another word, she turned and walked to the door. At the last moment, she stopped and looked back. "So someday you'll realize I was right," she said, her voice strangely calm now. "Someday you'll thank me." Julian didn't reply. He just waited until she left, closing the door firmly behind her. Only then did he allow his legs to tremble, leaning against the nearest wall so he wouldn't fall. How had he not noticed? How had he not seen the signs? Amanda was there every day by his side. She organized his life, knew his routine, had access to everything, including information about the girls' school, and he had never, not for a moment, suspected. Slowly, Julian climbed the stairs. He found Avery in the hallway outside the girls' hand room. "Are they okay?" he asked, his voice exhausted. "Scared, but they'll be fine," Avery replied. "They're sleeping now. I had to stay with them until they fell asleep." Julian nodded, running a hand over his face. The fatigue and the shock of the revelation weighed on him like a ton of concrete. His world, which had finally seemed to be straightening out, had just been turned upside down again. It was her was all he could manage. "Amanda, my secretary." Avery watched him with concern. It was clear that Julian needed to process what had just happened, that there was much more to be said and understood. But not now, not tonight. "You should rest," she suggested gently. "Tomorrow we can talk better about all this." Julian nodded, grateful for her silent understanding. The conversation they needed to have, about Amanda, about the girls, about what to do next, would have to wait until morning. "Thank you for being here today," he said simply. "Any time you need me," Avery replied. That night, with his daughters finally safe and the mystery resolved, Julian felt the weight of guilt and responsibility as never before. Danger had been so close, so familiar, and he hadn't noticed. As he stared at his bedroom ceiling, unable to sleep, a certainty formed in his mind: from now on, nothing would ever be the same. 2 weeks had passed since the night of the revelation. 2 weeks of intense changes at the Ward mansion. Julian had reinforced security at home and at school. Amanda was under police investigation, and a restraining order kept her away from the family. The twins, though still occasionally frightened by the episode, seemed to be processing the trauma with the help of a child therapist who visited them 3 times a week. As for Julian, he faced his own demons, the guilt for not having noticed the danger so close, the anger that someone had used his trust to hurt his daughters, and the constant worry that perhaps there were other dangers he wasn't seeing. That Saturday morning, as he watched Nora and Hazel playing in the garden under the watchful eye of one of the security guards, Julian made a decision that had been maturing since the night of the confrontation with Amanda. He picked up the phone and made a call. "Avery, it's Julian. Could you come over today? I need to talk to you about something important." Avery arrived in the early afternoon, wearing jeans and a simple blouse. Julian greeted her at the door, noting how the twins immediately ran to hug her. It was always like this. Their faces lit up at the sight of Avery like flowers opening to the sun. "Girls, I need to talk to Avery privately for a few minutes," Julian explained. "Why don't you go show Mrs. Winters that puzzle we started yesterday?" The twins nodded, though reluctant to leave Avery so soon. "Are you staying for dinner?" Hazel asked, holding Avery's hand. "If your dad invites me, sure. Consider yourself invited," Julian smiled. Satisfied with the promise of more time with Avery, the girls finally pulled away, running into the house. Julian led Avery to the back terrace of the mansion, a quiet place with a view of the well-kept gardens. "The girls seem to be handling everything well," Avery commented, sitting in one of the wicker chairs. "Better than I expected," Julian agreed. "The therapist says children have surprising resilience, especially when they feel safe and loved." He paused, looking at the horizon beyond the gardens. "Much of that is thanks to you, Avery." "I just tried to help." "No, it's much more than that," Julian interrupted her, turning to face her directly. "You saved my daughters. Literally, that night in the park when they were hungry and lost. But then, you saved them in ways I can't even explain." Avery lowered her eyes, uncomfortable with the praise. "Any decent person?" "No," Julian said firmly. "Not just any person. You saw them when they were invisible. You listened when they were silent. You gave them a safe space to be vulnerable, to trust again." He took a deep breath as if gathering courage. "And you saved me too, Avery." She looked up, surprised by the intensity in his voice. "What do you mean?" "I was lost," Julian admitted. "Drowning in work, responsibilities, success, and completely disconnected from what truly matters. You showed me how to be a real father, how to be present, how to listen, how to see." Julian stood up, walking to the terrace balustrade. From there, he could see the girls downstairs, through a window, assembling their puzzle with Mrs. Winters. The simple fact of knowing exactly where they were, what they were doing, was a comfort he hadn't valued before. "I've been thinking a lot in the last few weeks," he continued, "about the future, about what's best for the girls, and about how to rebuild some parts of my life." He turned to face Avery again. "I need a new executive assistant." The abrupt change of subject caught Avery off guard. "Oh, I imagine so. But I don't just want a replacement for Amanda. I want a complete change in how I manage my work, my time, my priorities." Julian sat back down, leaning slightly forward. "Avery, I'd like to offer you the position of my personal assistant." She blinked, clearly not expecting this. "Me? But, Julian, I'm a waitress. I have no corporate experience. I don't know anything about the businesses you run. I have no background. You have everything that truly matters," he interrupted gently. "Integrity, sensitivity, firmness when necessary. And, above all, the kind of humanity my office desperately needs." Avery shook her head, confused. "But why? You could hire someone with much better qualifications. I'm not offering it out of charity or as a form of payment for what you did for the girls," Julian clarified, correctly reading her concern. "I'm offering it because I trust you, and trust, I've learned the hard way, is the rarest and most valuable qualification of all." Avery fell silent, processing the proposal. Julian didn't pressure her, giving her the space she needed to consider his words. "I don't know anything about being an executive assistant," she finally said. "Personal," Julian corrected with a small smile. "Personal assistant. The difference is important. And as for what you need to know, I can teach you. The rest you'll learn over time." "What about the salary?" Avery asked, practical as always. Julian mentioned an amount that made her eyes widen. "That's much more than I earn now. It's fair value for the work and responsibility. No more, no less." Avery looked at her own hands, then at the garden, as if seeking answers in the afternoon air. "What can I think about it? Of course, take all the time you need." "What about the girls?" she asked. "If I'm at the office with you, I won't be able to spend as much time with them." Julian smiled, appreciating how, even when faced with a life-changing opportunity, Avery's first concern was for Nora and Hazel. "I thought about that too. As my personal assistant, you'll have flexible hours, and part of your job will actually be to help coordinate my schedule so I can spend more time with them myself." Avery nodded slowly, beginning to understand Julian's vision. "Also," he continued, "I'd like you to continue being a part of their lives, part of our family in a way. Something lit up in Avery's eyes when she heard the word family. Julian realized with sudden clarity that this word carried a special weight for her, a woman who, from what little he knew, lived alone and had only co-workers for company. "I need to think," she repeated, but her tone had changed. There was a spark of hope, of possibility. "Of course," Julian agreed. "Now, I think there are 2 girls inside eagerly waiting for you to see their puzzle." 3 days later, Avery walked into the imposing building that housed the Ward Enterprises headquarters. She wore a simple but elegant suit, bought especially for the occasion, and carried a small box with her personal belongings. At the reception, she was greeted with formal respect by employees who had clearly been informed of her arrival. One of them led her to the executive floor, where Julian awaited her. "Welcome," he said, smiling as he saw her step out of the elevator. "Ready for your first day?" "As ready as I can be," she replied, trying to hide her nervousness. Julian gave her a tour of the office, introducing her to directors, managers, and assistants. Some seemed curious, others skeptical, but all were polite. The news of Amanda's sudden dismissal and the obscure circumstances surrounding it were undoubtedly a topic of speculation throughout the company. Finally, Julian showed Avery her new workstation, an elegant antechamber connecting the main hallway to his office. "This will be your space," he explained. "I know it seems intimidating now, but you'll get used to it quickly." Avery placed her small box on the imposing desk, feeling strangely out of place in that corporate luxury environment. But then her eyes caught something that made her smile. A colorful and slightly crooked drawing, carefully framed, hanging on the wall behind the desk. It showed 3 stick figures, 2 small and 1 large, holding hands. "The girls insisted I bring this to make you feel at home," Julian explained, following her gaze. And, somehow, that simple drawing did exactly that. The first few weeks were a steep learning curve. Avery absorbed information about the company, learned systems, memorized names and protocols. But she also brought something new to the corporate environment, a genuine humanity that did not go unnoticed. When an intern spilled coffee moments before an important meeting, instead of the reprimand he expected, he received Avery's help to clean up the mess and a reassuring smile. When an assistant needed to leave early to pick up her sick child from school, she found an ally in Avery, who reorganized the schedule without a fuss. Small gestures that, added together, began to transform the environment. The executive floor, once known for its tense and formal atmosphere, gradually became a place where people breathed a little easier. Julian observed these subtle changes with quiet satisfaction. The decision to bring Avery in had not just been personal, it had been strategic too. His empire was efficient and profitable, but it lacked something he was only now beginning to value: heart. At home, the transition was even smoother, and Avery remained present in the twins' lives, now with the added legitimacy of her official role in Julian's life. Family dinners became frequent. On weekends, park outings, zoo visits, and movie nights at home naturally included all 4 of them. One Sunday afternoon, while Julian was on the phone sorting out a work matter, Avery helped the twins with an art project for school. Spread across the living room table were colored papers, glue, scissors, and glitter, the latter already scattered across the floor, to Mrs. Winter's future despair. "What exactly are we making?" Avery asked, trying to understand the creative chaos unfolding before her. "A map of our family," Nora explained, concentrating on cutting out a shape that vaguely resembled a house. "The teacher asked us to show who's important to us," Hazel added, applying generous amounts of glue to a piece of blue paper. Avery watched the girls work, their faces serious in concentration. Only a few months had passed since that cold night in the park, but it felt like a lifetime. The twins had transformed from frightened, hungry children into vibrant, secure girls. "Done!" Nora finally exclaimed, holding up the completed project. It was a colorful, chaotic collage, as one would expect from 6-year-old artists. In the center, there were 4 stick figures, a tall one with what looked like a tie, obviously Julian, 2 smaller identical ones, the twins, and a 4th figure with long brown hair, Avery. Around the figures, various shapes represented the house or the garden, and other important elements in their lives. At the top, in crooked, colorful letters, was written, "Our family." "And this one is for you," Hazel said, pushing another piece of paper towards Avery. It was a simpler drawing, just the 3 female figures within the outline of a heart. Below, written in the careful hand of a child learning to write, the words, "You are our home." Avery felt something tighten in her throat. "It's beautiful," she managed to say, blinking rapidly to clear the moisture threatening to form in her eyes. "It's because before you we were lost," Nora explained with the profound simplicity children sometimes possess. "But you found us, and now we're home," Hazel completed, hugging Avery around the neck. Nora joined the hug on the other side, and Avery found herself enveloped in the warmth and unconditional love of the 2 girls. The drawing in her hands, "You are our home," said everything that needed to be said. Julian, who had finished his call and was watching the scene from the doorway, felt his own heart expand at the sight. He had invited Avery into their lives out of gratitude, trust, professional respect. But what he was witnessing now went far beyond that. It was a family. Unconventional, perhaps. Not what he would have ever imagined for himself, but real, alive, true. Avery looked up and saw Julian watching. Something passed between them, a silent understanding, an unspoken promise. Whatever the future held, they would face it together. Looking at the drawing in her hands and at the girls clinging to her, Avery felt a certainty settle in her heart. After years of solitary existence, of anonymous work, of living on the fringes, she had finally found her place in the world. She had found her home. Not in a mansion on a hill, not in an executive office, but in the hearts of 2 girls who had needed her on a cold night, and in the respect of a man who had learned to see beyond appearances. "You are our home," the drawing said, and for the first time in her life, Avery knew exactly where she belonged. If this story touched your heart, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next ones. Leave a like, because it helps this story get recommended to more people. See you in the next story.